Welcome to the Global Online Meetup, where we're going to talk about SUSE Rancher 2.6. If you're not expecting to be here, it's like when you get on the plane and they're like, if you're not flying to Las Vegas, please raise your hand. Well, if you didn't expect this meetup, please stay anyway, because we have some fantastic information to share with you about what's new in SUSE Rancher 2.6. Let me just check here. I see we got people. Everybody's mostly rolled in, taking a seat. That's good. So we have a lot of stuff to cover today. First, let's start with some agenda information. We're in the introduction right now, and then I'm going to hand it off to my esteemed colleague, who I'll introduce to you in just a moment. And he's going to take you through an overview of SUSE Rancher 2.6 that's going to end in a demo. Now, if you're familiar with Rancher, this is going to look a little bit different. We've made some tremendous changes to the user interface to dramatically improve the user experience and what you can do with Rancher. So stick around and make sure that you stay for that part. And then at the end, we always have Q&A. We'll talk about that in a second. My name is Adrian Goins. I am the Principal Product Evangelist. They just recently changed my title. Principal Product Evangelist here at SUSE, and I'm joined by Bill Maxwell, who's the Director of Product Management for SUSE Rancher. Bill, would you like to say hello?
Hey, everyone.
There you go. Bill said hello. We are also joined today by John Pugh from the SUSE and Rancher community. He's going to be helping out with the Q&A section. John, would you like to say hi?
Yeah, hey, everybody. Thanks, Adrian.
All right. We didn't get a picture of John to put in the slide, so sorry about that, John. If you've ever been to one of our meetups before, you know this is a meetup. It's not a webinar. We're not just going to demo a bunch of stuff for you and then be like, all right, peace out. It's a hands-on interactive presentation of what we've got going on, but it's designed for you to interact with us. So we've got some basic rules. Be flexible. It might go long. We blocked out 2 hours for this. We might be done in an hour. We might be done in 2.5 hours. I've never seen one of these go longer than 2.5 hours, because by then we're all just totally exhausted. But it's here for you to ask questions. If you look at GoToWebinar's little panel thingy, there's a questions panel there. When you think of a question, ask it. John and I are going to be going through those. We'll select some to ask live to Bill. If you would specifically like your question answered live, just put that in the question, please answer live or something like that, or for Bill, and we'll flag it accordingly. The only thing that I ask is that you try to keep your questions on topic for the information that we're sharing with you today. Since it's Rancher, it's a pretty broad topic. We're not going to be able to answer specific troubleshooting style questions. So if you have those, go ahead and ask them, and then John will send you a reply and direct you to one of our other resources. But regardless, there are no bad questions. If you got a question, ask it, because I bet you somebody else has that question too. We're going to demo as much of Rancher as we can. It's a pretty broad product, but we'll show you some of the use cases, and we'll talk about how you can get started with it. And hopefully today things aren't going to break, but oftentimes at our meetups things do. And you know what? That's just a part of technology. So if it breaks, it just becomes a live troubleshooting session. Hang out and we'll get back on track. One of the first questions that we always get, if it's not already in the questions panel, it's not, I'm surprised. Is this being recorded? It absolutely is. Because these are of a variable time, if you can only stay for an hour and you need to drop off, don't worry about it. We're recording this. We're recording this, and you will get a link sent to your email, whatever you registered as, that tells you where you can watch the video afterwards. So if you got to drop, just come back. Felix, very funny. Felix just asked, is this meeting recorded? All right, so we just got a question from Shivdeep. We're using GoToWebinar. GoToWebinar is a platform that I don't think has been updated since like 2004. And one of the things that we do see people experience as a problem is audio goes away. When that happens, if it doesn't come back right away, just exit and rejoin, and that usually fixes it. It's never on our side. It's on the awesome cloud platform side of GoToWebinar. So yeah, this is being recorded. You'll get a link on where you can go and get a copy of the slides as well as the video. Resources where you can go after this to ask questions or to hang out with other people who use Rancher products. We have the Rancher Slack network. If you're not already in here, you can get an invitation from slack.rancher.io. Just go there, enter your email address. Slack sends you an invite, and you can join. There are something like 27,000 people registered. There are thousands of people online at any given time. There are channels for every single imaginable topic related to Rancher and Kubernetes and Susa and the stuff that we're doing. So that's the best place to go for direct live interaction with your peers. I hang out there, John hangs out there, other members from the community team and from the engineering team also hang out there, but it's really about the community and finding other people who have walked in your shoes and can help you move forward. We also have the Susa and Rancher community, which is free, and you can join by going to community.susa.com. This is a place where you can also interact with members of the community, but it has tremendous resources to help move you forward in your cloud native journey, including free classes that cover Kubernetes, Rancher, cloud native development, and a whole host of other things. This is the place to be. So go and check that out. And as I said earlier on, some of the questions may get directed to here if we're either not able to answer them live or if they're off topic. So come check this place out. And with that, my introduction is done. And Bill, if you're ready. Actually, before I go, Mark asked a question. What was that YouTube channel link? Dun, dun, dun. This is being recorded. The videos end up on youtube.com/c/rancher, but you'll get an email that has a link to the actual video itself. I do all the post-production work, so once I get it uploaded, then we'll send you there. So, Bill, are you ready?
Yeah, just getting this, sharing my screen.
Nicholas just asked, where can we get a nice SUSE Rancher t-shirt? You'll notice that I'm wearing this fancy, it's got all the products on the back. These are limited edition. Connie, are you still here? Connie was going to stay, but she was going to be muted. All right, looks like she's not here. I don't know if these are available for purchase. I know that we have a store. I'm not sure what the status of the store is. So Nicholas, I'll just make a note and I'll try and get you an answer from Connie. Bill, if you're ready, take it away.
Yeah, I think you can also get a t-shirt if you're an employee at SUSE. So if there's a job link on the main career board there that's interested, please apply.
That's a great way to get a t-shirt. Come work at SUSE.
Yep. All right, so just a bit of introduction onto SUSE and Rancher and how we've come together and the way that we're continuing to operate going forward. SUSE takes an open and interoperable approach. So whether you're using one of our Linux or Kubernetes distributions, and regardless of where you're running, we provide world-class distributions, but we also don't limit you to just the things that we produce. We within the Rancher and Kubernetes ecosystem support all of the managed hosted providers and CNCF distributions. We manage, we can have the ability to work with other Linux distributions with some of our management tools as well. And of course, we provide world-class distributions, and we run on-prem, in the cloud, wherever you happen to be on your IT journey. SUSE Rancher can support you there. And so SUSE Rancher, we take a unique approach to Kubernetes management. One of the things that we've learned early on is that it's a multi-cluster world. You're going to have multiple Kubernetes clusters, dev, test, prod immediately, or you could be running globally. And so you've got to have a way to manage all of that. We like to treat every Kubernetes distribution as a first-class citizen as best we can and support those as much of the distribution as possible. And so we provide three distributions, Rke, Rke2, and K3s, but we can also manage CNCF certified distros and all of the primary hosted cloud managed solutions. And what we realize is that really getting a cluster has become a lot more straightforward over the last few years. And where we can provide a lot of value and assistance is in the management of all those clusters. How do you ensure that they're consistently configured? How do you ensure that the policy you want to have on each cluster is applied? And then everything we do is open source. And so we take a very open approach to working with multiple different distributions and different parts of the stack. We are as open as possible. And so any organization, if you haven't seen this before, any organization that's adopting Kubernetes really needs a couple different things. One is a CNCF certified Kubernetes distribution, and the other is a way to manage and centralize your operations. And so in the SUSE Rancher context, we've got an Rke data center distribution. We've got support for all of the managed cloud providers, and on the edge, we've got our K3S distribution. So we've got you covered on CNCF certified distros. And then SUSE Rancher itself is that management platform. What it really opens up and centralizes is the ability to centralize your operations. So your provisioning, your upgrades, and configuration is all brought into through orchestrated by Rancher. We centralize your authentication and your policies for security and how you can visualize and capture all your metrics and log data. And then we've got all of your day two operations. So we've got monitoring, logging, service mesh, and storage support, also that you can be able to deploy your applications on a reliable Kubernetes platform. And SUSE Rancher is a market leader in the Kubernetes management space. You can see in the Forrester Wave, we're up and to the right with the likes of IBM and Google. We've been working on the Kubernetes management space for a long time, and we continue to innovate within the ecosystem. And we're still 100% open source. After the SUSE acquisition, everything Rancher that you'll see today is part of the open source Rancher. If you would like support, we do have the supported SUSE Rancher brand, which is supported by SUSE and Rancher. So let's get into the meat of why we're all here today. We're here to talk about the new release, SUSE Rancher 2.6. This is the first release, major release that Rancher's done as part of SUSE. And so we've got a lot of great things that came along in this update. Looking at the three main areas of focus, the first is the UI. We've got new expanded design team as we come into SUSE Rancher, and we've expanded the app. What we really focused on was creating a unified and simplified set of workflows and experience within the new UI. We've got full lifecycle management of all hosted Kubernetes providers. In 2.5, we started with EKS, and now we fully support Microsoft and Google's offerings as well. And continuing to always focus on security and bring that front and center. We've improved our audit logging capabilities and swapped out some of our base container images, moving towards Sleep. So looking at the UI, one of the big things that we've noticed is that we wanted to create a UI experience for both the beginning and the advanced user, so that they can approach Kubernetes management through a single pane of glass and find it easy to work with. So in Rancher 2.6, we've created an overall new experience. It's got a new homepage. We've simplified the navigation, making it easier to find and navigate between your different clusters. And then once you're in any particular cluster, we've made it very straightforward to work with the most common set of Kubernetes objects. But as you advance and mature in your Kubernetes usage, we expose every option or every resource within the Kubernetes cluster that's available through advanced portals. Now, we've done this in such a way that the new UI is less overwhelming for a new user. And we've used a lot of the same language that we've used in previous versions to really make that transition as easy as possible. And so the other big thing we've added is support for AKS and Gke. And really, this is, in 2.5, we started with EKS. And what we did there was added, made it much more in line with the features offered through the cloud provider, and then the ability to import and register those clusters, so that if you provision them outside of Rancher, you could take those over and then have Rancher manage the Kubernetes version and configuration going forward. And so in 2.6, we now have support for AKS and Gke. They're added to the mix. And so what this means is you now have the option to configure the cluster more in line with what's expected, through the cloud portals. But also, if you've been provisioning clusters or you've got very advanced network topologies or things that are outside the purview of the primary Kubernetes provisioning piece, you can provision those with like a Terraform or other cloud native infrastructure tool, and then give Rancher credentials to manage those clusters going forward. And so then Rancher could take over the Kubernetes upgrade pieces or the settings within the cluster. And if you continue to manage sort of in two places, Rancher is updating periodically to see that those configuration changes are in sync. The other big thing that we've done is expanded our tooling. And so our logging, monitoring, CIS scanning tools, those are all now able to be used and leveraged on top of all cluster types. And so we've got profiles for each one of those so that you can learn, we pick everything from the CNCF ecosystem. And so when we pick those tools up, those are a common set of tools and frameworks. And so you can use those, and they're portable between Kubernetes distributions or between clusters versus potentially having to go deep on any one of the cloud providers. It gives you a common baseline instead of infrastructure pieces. We also bring to this mix, our centralized authentication. It also brings the ability to use Rancher catalogs and deploy applications through our Helm-based catalogs onto those clusters. And again, security is always a big focus within Rancher. And so in 2.6, what we've done here is we've enhanced the audit logging experience so that as users are interacting with the cluster through the UI, or in the future, we're in a couple of updates, we'll have through the kube control and the ACE bits, you'll be able to interact with the cluster and see the user name based on as Rancher knows the user and as the IDP provider specified the user. What this allows you to do is follow a user through activities throughout the cluster stack. And the nice thing is if you're running a Kubernetes container platform with that, what your cluster owners or operators, if they're shipping the audit logs from Kubernetes API server to a system, they can now look at and understand which user did what based on the common username without having to ask someone that runs the centralized Rancher management plane to map that user identity. So it really helps and enhances the auditing experience. The other big thing, since SUSE and Rancher have come together, SUSE has world-class Linux through SUSE Linux Enterprise, and so we have a new base image that we've started transitioning to that's built on all of the SLE goodness. So both the Rancher server and Rancher agent have moved to this new image, and over time we will continue to migrate our other images to this common base, simplifying it and providing a reliable, secure base. We've also got our tech preview of cluster provisioning, which can be driven through our GitOps-based workflows. We've started a transition to cluster API-based provisioning for Rke2 and K3s clusters through Rancher. This is currently in tech preview, but what this means is now you can create a template that describes the entirety of a cluster. So beyond just the Kubernetes configuration, you can specify machine configurations, the credentials to use, and labels to apply so that it automatically gets tied to specific Git repositories, really tying this together and giving you a central GitOps out of our infrastructure as code solution out of the box is ultimately what we want Rancher to get to. And this is just a tech preview of our next step. So I always like a demo. I think that's the best way. But before we jump into that, would now be a good time to maybe answer a few questions.
We don't actually have any specific questions. We've gotten some questions about what we're going to see in the demo. So I think if you just want to dive in and show people what they get with SUSE Rancher 2.6, there are some questions that went by about like the consolidated UI, some questions about authentication and 2FA. So maybe talk about key cloak. But I think you'll hit everything, and then out of that, we'll get more questions.
Sounds good. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the new home screen within Rancher 2.6. So this is the first experience you'll get with the new UI. Within this, you can see quickly, what's been added to 2.6. You can get a quick getting started guide, set a couple preferences. You've got a list of your clusters you can search here. We've also got links to the community support areas, so making it easier to find support. The other thing that we've greatly simplified in Rancher 2.6 is the navigation menu. So now the new global level, the top level navigation moves between individual clusters, global apps, and configuration. So, this is all new, so it's good to just kind of go back and walk through kind of everything that Rancher offers. So we'll just kind of walk through all of that. Here's the new user authentication bit. When you create a new Rancher installation, you'll naturally want to tie it to your centralized authentication bits. So here we've added a new support for Keycloak, which will have OIDC backends, but the rest of the providers all remain the same from previous versions. And so, you can tie this into your centralized authentication system, and from then on, users in your organization can log in using the enterprise identity provider that you've configured in your organization. Once they're tied in, you can create different roles for all of your users, and so this is all consolidated into the top level here. So you can create roles and then apply them at different levels. So you can create global roles, which are scoped to sort of the Rancher management and control plane level. There's cluster roles that can be applied across an entire cluster, and then there's project and namespace level roles that can be created that are tied at a much narrower scope into project and namespace context. We've got our users, so once a user logs in, you can specify their role once they are added into the system and they've logged in. You can also assign groups to default roles as well. The other big thing, so we've also centralized all of our global settings into a new thing. So you have access to all of the advanced settings, feature flags as you've been able to access them before. And this is new in 2.6, and we've centralized all of sort of the branding pages and settings into a single place. So within this, you can update the company private label. You can have your own issue reporting URL. You can have it disable so that you don't show the Rancher community links. You can use a custom logo, which will change from the cow to something of your own organization. You can change the primary color. In this case, it would be this green, but you can change that to another color of your choosing. And then we've also got the ability to add banners at the header and footer level. So all centralized in a single place. This makes it much easier to update the settings that we've had in the past, but brings it all into the forefront in a single, easy to use panel. So once you have that, the other big thing now that everyone does is they always want to be able to get a cluster. And so here is the new cluster management page. It lists all of the clusters and also gives you the ability to import existing clusters. This would also be, so when you click on this, you have the ability to import existing EKS, AKS, or GKE clusters, and this will bring those in, you provide credentials, and then Rancher will be able to take over the management of those going forward. We can also allow you to import any CNCF certified Kubernetes cluster, and from there we can manage deploying applications and policies from the Kubernetes API layer and above. We've also got the ability to create new clusters for you, and so here we can create new EKS, AKS, and GKE clusters. Let's take a quick look at AKS. Here we can give it a name. Select a cloud credential. So everything now is driven by cloud credentials, and what this does is it decouples the security credential from the actual cluster configuration. So if you use this credential for multiple clusters, you can easily rotate the key without having to update all of the clusters or kick off an update of the downstream cluster. So you can pick your location. So here you can pick your Kubernetes versions. You can have it create a new AKS resource group, or you can create a new one. Your common settings here. You can also configure your networks and which policy and CNI you're going to be able to use. If you use Calico, you can enable that. Then here you can have multiple node pools, which is new to the new provisioning framework. Previously, you could only specify one. And under the hood, this is using VM scaling sets. What is nice now is you can enable auto scaling for AKS clusters, and it leverages the native AKS auto scaling solution. So you can specify a min and max node count, and those will automatically update. You can select your instance types and different versions. We've also made it easier to configure the private endpoints and different networking capabilities here. We've also added, GKE is now also fully supported, and so you can specify your cloud credential and your project ID. Pick which location you want. We did add support for Rancher's project network isolation to our GKE clusters. As long as you pick one of the CNIs that enforce network policy, you'll be able to leverage that. That does is it isolates the network traffic between projects in a cluster. You can now pick your network, which a big change here is that you can now select networks from shared VPCs. So if you are following Google best practices, where one project might be managing the network and sharing out networks to other components, you can now leverage that, and select that from the dropdowns. Select your networking settings. Here we've also added more of the GKE supported node configurations, and then also out of the box using the native auto scaling capabilities of GKE that is now accessible to you as well. You can add multiple node pools with different settings. We've also added these additional advanced settings as well. So here in Rancher 2.6, the primary Kubernetes distribution that we provision is still Rke. And so you'll be able to provision Rke 121 now as well. And so here are the main node drivers. As you've always used, we still have the ability to do custom clusters. Now, as part of a tech preview, we've added support for provisioning Rke2 clusters. So this is for users not for production use at this time. This is for community users and dev and test environments to start taking Rke2 through its paces. We've added support for provisioning on the different node drivers, as well as custom. If you would like to use Windows nodes, that is also through custom as well. Here you can see we're supporting Kubernetes 121. We've added multiple network CNIs to Rke2, so Calico is now the default, but we've also added support for Cilium and Multis plus those. You can select the cloud provider, default security policies, and if you want to use the Rke2 security profiles, you can do that as well. We've added multiple levels of the configurations and the ability to update it. And for any advanced options, of course, we have the method of updating the YAML bits. Okay, so here you can also see all of the different cloud credentials that are available and used as different parts of the provisioning engines. So let's jump into one of the Also at the top level, we have our continuous delivery through Fleet. So this is still the continuous delivery solution that we introduced in 2.5. It is now moved to a top level app. So you don't need to jump into any specific cluster to get to it. You can still add all of your Git repositories. Every cluster that's registered into Rancher is automatically added to Fleet and can have GitOps. You use GitOps to do infrastructure as code. There is a new feature flag in 2.6 that allows you to shut off the GitOps piece. Under the hood, Rancher's now starting to use the Fleet mechanisms for delivery. That can't be shut off, but you can disable the part where you map Git repos outside of Rancher. So jumping into a specific cluster, let's jump into this Rke2 cluster that I provisioned earlier. You can see now when you jump into this cluster, it is everything on the left-hand side is simplified and consolidated. We've used the same language from our 2.5 or 2.4 UX, so things are referred to as workloads and service discovery, but you're still getting at your apps, daemon sets, and deployments. Our primary navigation now, we have the concept of the project within here, but you can select specific namespaces, and then ultimately ends up being a filter on what you're viewing. Within a cluster now, we've added the ability to manage your projects, so you can create new projects, map out your members and different roles, set up resource quotas and default limits, and then you can add multiple namespaces to these projects. And once teams are assigned to these projects, they'll be able to leverage those as well. Yeah, we've also added the cluster tools section here to simplify finding where you would get at your monitoring and logging capabilities, your Longhorn storage. So your day 2 operations tools are easily accessed through here. However, you can still access them as well through the apps and marketplace that we introduced in 2.5. Here we've got our partner charts that you can also install and leverage as well. You can see all of our installed apps. So whether you've installed these applications through Fleet or through apps and marketplace or they have a command line, they're all visible through this interface. You can quickly switch between clusters. Jumping over to here. In this cluster, I've installed Rancher monitoring. And so you can see the graphs are now brought back at a cluster level. We've also added, at this point, we've added the metrics graphs back at the pod level as well. So here you can see the dashboards for a specific pod and get the metrics here, and they all link back out to Grafana. This is a common ask in 2.5 with the new monitoring solutions that the dashboard, show some of that metric information in those dashboards. So we're bringing those back. In future updates, we'll bring back the aggregates at the deployment and more of the higher level deployment concepts. But in 2.6.0, we have the ability to view the dashboards for the cluster and pod level. So yeah, that was our quick walkthrough through the Rancher 2.6, but now would probably be a good time to take some questions.
And boy, are there questions. Okay, so just starting from the top. Prakash asks, is the cluster operator tech preview available on GitHub?
Cluster operator. Not sure I follow what the cluster operator means exactly in this context.
Okay. Prakash, if you could ask that question with a little bit more detail about specifically what you're looking for, we will ask it again. Next, we have a question from Jedri, who is asking, can apps installed in the old UI or Helm 2 be migrated to the new UI or Helm 3, or is it better to just uninstall them and reinstall them?
Today, the answer is uninstall, reinstall. We are looking into a migration path, or at least a way to potentially do that in the future. But today, the easiest is, of course, uninstall, reinstall into a new, and then into a new deployment.
Okay. Garrison asks if secure device onboarding, SDO, is in the Rancher roadmap.
Yeah, it's something we're exploring and looking into, but that's closely aligned with what we're looking at for Edge, which is a bit more expanded of a topic than what we're covering in 2.6 today.
Prakash asks, for the node upgrades, do you ask for an OS password during upgrade, or do you store the password internally?
For node upgrades, so when you provision,
way bigger, so they may be related to something that you were showing, but I'm not sure exactly where the context is.
Oh, no worries. So when you're creating a cluster with the node drivers, each one of them requires a cloud credential. And so whether you're using, and depending on whether you're provisioning Rke or Rke2, it's slightly different. In Rke, we are we use SSH as the provisioning mechanism. So there's a username, password. There's a way that Rancher is interacting with that node through SSH. Actually, I could show a really cool feature of 2.6. When you provision through Rke2, instead of doing SSH, we use the Cloud Init under the hood. And so we just load everything through a Cloud Init configuration. So there's no SSH requirement during provisioning. But of course, there is a key pair so that you could access it. And actually, one of the cool features, if I can jump into my Rke2 cluster, if I come to the nodes, we've added an SSH shell. So what we previously would do is you had to download a zip file and untar it on your laptop, and then try and remember which user this was tied to. If it's an Ubuntu box, it's core or something. I don't know. But anyway, you had to get all that information SSH, manually. In 2.6, we've added the ability to do an SSH session into the node directly from the UI. So this is really cool. So here I've connected into the box, and you can see, it's been running, for a few hours. Check the load average. So this is really slick. You can still get at the key pair to download it and use it on your laptop, but for quick troubleshooting and diagnostics, you can now do this as well.
That is quite cool.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, that's an excellent answer. All right, the questions are still rolling in. So as I suspected, short demo, lots of questions. We have two questions, one from Paolo and the other one from Francois, and they're similar. Paolo asks if the upgrade from 2.5 to 2.6 is seamless, and Francois asks about direct migration from 2.4 to 2.6. And Francois is actually in an air-gapped environment, if that makes any difference.
No, the upgrade path is the same as it's been through all 2.x releases. So you can upgrade from 2.5 to 2.6. You just update the Helm chart and install following the Rancher documentation. Always check the release notes for any potential caveats to that. But yeah, following the docs and the release notes, it's a standard upgrade procedure for Rancher. So usually very simple and straightforward. Jumping from 2.4 to 2.6, yes, that is something you can do. In the air gap, again, check the Rancher docs and support matrix and the release notes for any caveats or gotchas.
Okay. Vinicius asks about Rancher CLI. Is that still a thing, or is it gone? Will it come back?
It's still a thing and can be used. Its functionality, I believe, is on par with where it has been. And so leave the links for that. So you can get that the CLI downloads here. It still exists, it is still usable, and works with Rancher. I think in general, as an overall design goal, we're working towards we want to get to the point where, the infrastructure is code out of the box solution, includes all things Rancher, includes all things. So ultimately, our ultimate vision, way down the road would be to see it, get to kube control apply, and having, Rancher sort of the Rancher's specific CLI fade away, but we're not there yet. So yes, it's available.
Great. There are a number of questions about Rke versus Rke2. The first one we have is from Dominic, who asks, will Rke2 replace Rke at some point? And do we still recommend that people deploy Rke clusters today with Rancher? And will those be able to migrate to Rke2, or should they start with Rke2? Do we have any guidance?
Yeah, so Rke is our Docker-based distribution. We continue to support that, and we'll continue to support that for a long time. We added support in 2.6 with Rke Kubernetes 121. Now has the option to turn on the external Docker shim, so that you can continue to use Rke and Docker, going forward beyond the official the in-tree removal. I think it's in 122 or 123. So Rke, absolutely, it's rock solid. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of Rke clusters out there running. Right. It is very reliable, and I would, of course, recommend it. Rke2 is a distribution that we see in the ecosystem. The Containerd, other runtimes besides Docker are becoming more prevalent. Rke2 and K3s share a lot of common DNA. They move towards Containerd. And right now we're working towards getting it up to parity within Rancher as far as provisioning and the ability to use all of have the same experience with Rke2 in the future. And that is what the tech preview is showing, starting to showcase, and the direction we plan to go. At some point, we're looking at ways, where users, what the best transition path potentially is from an Rke to an Rke2 cluster if a user chooses to, because they decide they want to use Containerd or some other feature of Rke2. But right now, the default is Rke. We would recommend Rke, but Rke2 is also developing and a supported option.
Okay. Andrew asks, if you imported an Rke2 cluster in Rancher 2.5 and then upgrade to Rancher 2.6, will you get lifecycle management that's available in the tech preview?
No. You will get the same behavior that you had in 2.5. You will be able to upgrade the Kubernetes version going forward and using all of the day 2 operations tools. That path is still the supported path for Rke2 in 2.6. The provisioning path is all tech preview right now.
Okay. Frederick asks, I'm just trying to collect all the Rke questions here. Frederick says, actually, I'm not sure I understand that question. I'm not gonna subject you. Please ask this differently. So yeah, Frederick, your question about Rke and the Rancher cluster, can you ask that a little bit differently with a little bit more information, please? Okay, let's come back up to the top because we still have tons of questions. Okay, so here's a question. This is from Fred, and this is a question that we get a lot. Will Rancher remain free, or is it going to become a paid product in the near future? And if it remains free, is there any plan to reduce features or have different feature sets between the open source version and a paid version of SUSE Rancher?
Rancher and SUSE Rancher are the same shared code base. They're all open source and what you can download on GitHub. The key difference is that we sell the paid support is what you get when you buy Rancher support in the paid offering. Right now, that's how it's always been, and continues to be. There's no features targeted or scheduled to be held back from the open source version, and we continue to do all of our development, on GitHub and open source.
That is correct. yeah, we came from open source. We're going to stay open source. We're not going to steal anything away from anybody. All right, jumping back up to the top here. So, oh, okay. So this question is from Robbie. This is when you were showing the node pools and auto scaling with, I think it was with AKS. And Robbie asked if EKS also supports node pools and auto scaling.
So in EKS, everything's provisioned through an ASG. I believe the way EKS works today, and I'd have to double check the docs, is that you have to deploy I don't believe there's an easy button. You have to deploy it, but it is doable through our provisioning frameworks. You can apply the appropriate labels and everything else that you would need to do. But I don't think there's an easy button for that one.
Okay. Pez asks about the API, and his specific question is, can I see the API calls for each task in Rancher cluster management? And I thought maybe you could actually just show people, because we've gotten other API questions, maybe you can show people how to get to the API.
Yeah, so there's the v3 API endpoint. So when it comes to so when you provision an Rke1 cluster, that's all done through the v3 API endpoint, and then there's the ability to get at the API browser. But within of course, there is always this. Oops. So here is the v3 API, or as we affectionately call it, is the Norman API. And here you can click around and do your discovery to figure out the concepts that are within the Rancher frameworks that we have imported over to the GitOps-based model. For anything that is, that like our V2 tooling and everything else is moving towards just Kubernetes as the API, and we're just managing resources for that. So really the API for a cluster is this YAML spec now. And so this is the object that you would have to apply and be able to write to it. So this is, which is actually what's able to drive and enable the new cluster template versions, which is all driven by Helm charts. They're just Kubernetes manifests now. So we're in a transition state. There's the v3 API, which you can explore and click around and browse through here. To discover what we're doing within this framework, and then the frameworks that we have moved to GitOpsable, for lack of a better word, frameworks, then those are just the Kubernetes objects and manifests that you can manipulate through custom resources.
Okay. We had a question come through from Prakash, and I don't know if you saw, I was deciphering it while you were talking. But it looks like there's some confusion about Rke versus Rke2 and Docker versus Containerd. And so I wonder if you could just take a moment to explain the difference between Rke and Docker versus Rke2 and Containerd, and that 2.6 doesn't force a migration between the two of them.
Yeah. So Rke and Rke2 are Kubernetes distributions, and so they are packaging and the elements of a Kubernetes. They both ultimately use the upstream vanilla bits, but the deployment and orchestration mechanisms are a bit different for those two distributions. Now, Docker and Containerd are container runtime units. And so, in the very beginning, Docker, with its early success and just kind of dominating in that space, it was the default container runtime for Kubernetes. Over time, they wanted to make that pluggable. And so what they've done is created the container runtime interface, which defines a standard for being able to communicate with that. And that's opened the door to other runtimes. And so, and Docker is just one of them, Containerd is one of them, and then Cryo is another one that users, the ecosystem supports. So the way that Rke was orchestrated was through Docker, it has a hard dependency on that Docker orchestration, so it'll always use Docker as its container runtime. Rke2 has a new approach. It was designed with other runtimes in mind. Just having the benefit of being developed a few years later and the ecosystem changing, we learned. And so this makes it doesn't have a dependency on Docker. And so it can use containerd directly as a runtime. And so it's all about choice. And so whichever one you want to be able to use, right now is what's available to you. Hopefully that clarifies.
Yeah, that was an excellent answer. There was a history of Docker and Kubernetes. We have a question from, sorry if I say your name wrong, Hariharan, that I think actually ties to what you have up on your screen right now. So that's why I flagged it. Hariharan is asking, should I be able to edit individual core components of the cluster in the UI? For example, can I just edit API server arguments and then deploy?
Yeah, you can edit the YAML or edit through the form. Once you make those changes and edit it, those things would kick off reconciliation with those objects, and the controllers would pick them up and do the right thing.
Very cool. Declarative hotness. Felix, we should trademark that. Felix asks, how frequent are Kubernetes updates? Will he always be able to install the latest and greatest Kubernetes?
We're really quick with the patch releases and often 0-day on any of the big CVE releases within a patch. New versions of Kubernetes, we target trying to get them in within a few months of their release, but that's not always possible due to the changes that they've implemented where APIs are fluctuating. And I think we all sort of run into this, this API was deprecated, all these updates we have to do to make sure we're on the current APIs within the Kubernetes platform. So, we target as quickly as possible, but it's not always possible to get it within that initial target, but yeah.
We do the best we can.
Yep.
We're always working on it. It's not like when it comes out, if it's not immediately out or out as quickly as possible, it's because of some larger issue. And since Rancher, well, particularly now SUSE Rancher is supported, the things that we say it works on are covered under our SLA. So we have to make sure, without any shadow of a doubt, that those things are not going to disrupt any of the production clusters that are running under Rancher. So we make sure that we take our time, we test everything so that you have the confidence to know that when you deploy it, it's going to work.
Yep.
Felix has a follow-up question. It's unrelated, but can you talk a little bit about our support for Windows worker nodes?
Yeah, so Windows has been, throughout the 2.5 lifecycle, has been getting a lot of attention. We've ramped up the team, and so Rke and Windows, all of the V2 tooling was brought up to speed, and so it works on that. Rke2 is Windows node development, or provisioning Windows nodes is actively getting developed. As well as part of the tech preview, you can explore that. The Windows nodes, we're shifting a bit with Rke2. Previously, we had you select a Windows cluster specifically that was going to be that. What we've realized in Rke2 is that we want to be able to support the ability to add a Windows node to an existing cluster. So that's one shift that we're making in the future. We're adding support for Calico CNI, and so we're continuing to develop and add functionality and making sure that it's ready to go in Rke2, and we're ultimately ready to GA in that. But yeah,
all right,
a lot of activity going on in the Windows space.
Yes. Kaglar asks about creating custom clusters on ARM machines, such as the NVIDIA Jetson AGX. Can you talk about our ARM support?
Right now, the K3S is the distribution that works today on ARM. full ARM support within all of Rancher is on the roadmap. It's not ready today, but that's something we would like to get to. So right now, the Rke2 provisioning and that engine is all x86 based. Adding ARM support, yeah, like I said, I would expect it to be, like I said, it's on the roadmap and expect more from us in the future.
Okay. Hang on just a second here. All right. Just looking at other questions. All right. Can a single GPU be shared between jobs and projects?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
It's a very interesting question. That is an example of a question to take to either, well, probably actually the SUSE Rancher community, because you're going to be able to post it there. And it's going to, if you post it in Slack, oftentimes when things roll off the top of the screen, people don't see them anymore. But you can try in Slack, but ask that as a question in the SUSE Rancher community, and you'll get a lot of people who are going to chime in, who are working with GPUs and Rancher, and can tell you. Oh, here's an easy one for you, Bill. Christoph wants to know if there's a dark mode in Rancher 2.6.
Indeed, there is. It picks up the default. And so, yeah, there is a dark mode. The light mode, I usually use the light mode for demos. It shows a little better, but yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Nice. Dax says, metrics at the pods level is awesome. Does it matter which Kubernetes, whether it's Rke2, K3s, AKS, GKE, whatever, does it matter where the pod is running?
No, as long as everything's wired up, through that we were able to deploy and get at the access the metrics we need to through Kubernetes, those metrics should show up. But there's easy with monitoring v2. There's easy profiles for Rke2, K3s, Rke, EKS, AKS, and GKE. So those should all work.
Nice. Cole would like to know if there's any integration in the new UI for Longhorn.
Longhorn, you can deploy it through the apps and marketplace. The UI is still accessible. Actually, just I've installed it in this cluster. So Longhorn integrates here and clicks out into its own UI, but it's easier to get to through the new left-hand nav, and you can open it up quickly. And so here's the Longhorn UI.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow, we have lots of questions from Felix. Let's start with, can you talk for a moment about the primary differences between monitoring in Rancher 2.6 and monitoring that was in the previous versions?
Yeah, so in 2.5, we introduced a new version of monitoring, which we've, which is based primarily on, let's step back. The initial Rancher monitoring was, a tightly coupled integration into Rancher. We were using the Prometheus operator and a few other bits under the hood, but we were very restrictive in how those were consumed and used. And so it led to a lot of difficulties as users tried to integrate it into other parts of their monitoring infrastructure. So with monitoring v2, we wanted to move away from that model, while also aligning with the goal that we want everything to be configurable through Kubernetes manifests and ultimately through GitOps. Again, tying back to this, everything is infrastructure as code and having that available out of the box. So we introduced a new version of monitoring, which still leverages the Prometheus operator. And the way that we integrate and manipulate that now is through the native Kubernetes objects that the operator provides. But we're dialing back our restrictiveness of it, so that if you need to extend it or have access to some of its more in-depth configurations, you can still do that. The other big shift that we made was initially is that our original monitoring had both the concept of a cluster and a project level scope. what we heard from users was that there's a lot of Prometheus, resource-hungry Prometheus instances running out there. We want all of these custom metrics in this one, we only want to run one of them. And we want to also be able to use those metrics as part of our auto-scaling bits. So we also attempted to address that in the new monitoring v2 as well. So there's a centralized cluster monitoring Prometheus that ties into the metrics endpoint that the HPA can use. And then we've also made it so that anyone can deploy an application, describe how to monitor it, how to alert on it, and how to visualize that data, as part of their application deployment. So that is also supported with the v2 stuff. So kind of a long answer, but those are the key differences.
No, but an excellent answer. That level of detail is important so people understand that it's not like we just changed the name or something. There's a lot that went into it to make it better for them.
Yep.
All right, so before we get to the next round of questions, for those of you who noticed that we're at the top of the hour, if you came in late, this is being recorded. And so if you have to drop off for whatever reason, don't worry. We're going to go through the rest of these questions, and you'll get a link to this to where you can go and watch the video afterwards. So even if you asked a question that we haven't answered yet, you got to go. We'll get to your questions. And back to the questions. I think I'm just going to go through all the questions from Felix. Felix would like to know if the cloud init can be customized.
I believe it can.
Let's see if he has. Nope, he's got another one. Okay.
Yeah, I believe it can. I could be mistaken as well. I think I misspoke. Sorry, I don't know that it can at this point.
Okay.
I have to get back to you on that.
Okay. Felix, we'll get back to you on that. Bill thinks maybe. Next, we have a question from Felix. Where did that go? Oh, it disappeared. Okay, well, let's move on to questions from other people then. Sebastian would like to know if Rancher 2.6 is available for hosted Rancher.
I believe we hold off on upgrades until we move the tag to stable. That is scheduled for an update in the next few weeks. Once that happens, I believe then we can. I'm not sure the exact timetable for hosted to roll it out, but I know they would be waiting on that particular gate.
So let's follow that with a question from Neil about Rancher 2.6 being ready for production use, and maybe you can explain the difference between latest and stable.
Yeah, so when we ship a 2.6.0 release, that is a GA release. However, a .0 going out into the public, we typically will hold back the stable release or the stable tag on the image until we've given it some time to bake out in the community. We have a lot of open source users that pick it up and start playing with it, or hobbyists that start leveraging it, or even our enterprise customers will pick it up and start putting it in their test environments at that point. And it just gives us a bit of a buffer between if there's something that gets missed, or if there's an issue that just we were unaware of. And so it gives us a time to flush those out and make sure that it's a solid release. We get any, typically, after the release, if there's any bugs that do pop up, it gives us the opportunity to address those. And then once we're confident that we have, we will, do a release and move the stable tag. And at that point, we would then recommend or support users, existing customers wanting to upgrade their production environments and workloads to that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that explanation. We have an updated response from Prakash about the cluster operator question from earlier. Mm-hmm. Prakash says, I heard that 2.6 supports cluster API provider for Rke. to manage the cluster. And Prakash is wondering if this cluster API provider is available on GitHub.
I see. We are using cluster API for Rke2 provisioning under the hood. Everything is done open source. I do not know if that's packaged outside of Rancher or if it is part of Rancher itself. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. We have a question from Zach. I assume the node shell functionality uses an ephemeral container and nsenter PID1. If so, that's a nice assumption. If that's true, can you specify your own toolbox image for these operations? What an excellent question.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that, but.
Okay, so Zach, that's a fantastic example of a question to take to the SUSE and Rancher community and say, you saw this and you wanted to know, what this is. Clearly, you're somebody who understands the nuts and bolts of what's going on with Kubernetes. So posting that in the community would be a great way to get the conversation started. Next, we have a question from Zachary, not related to Zach. Zachary would like to know if Rancher CLI and Kim are ever going to be merged into one thing.
Not currently planned. They have different functions. Yeah, not currently planned, but they have different functions. For those not aware, Rancher CLI interacts with Rancher Management Server and the concepts within that. Kim is our Kubernetes Image Manager CLI, which allows you to do build, pull, push type of operations with a Kubernetes cluster. So a good example of using that is like a K3s cluster running on your laptop. You install Kim. At that point, you can deploy Kubernetes objects, right? But you can't build a container or pull an image or push an image. So this gives you an interface that you can then build a Docker file, build an image, which then you can deploy into the Kubernetes cluster because it's built part of that whole framework. So it's really a useful tool, but currently very separate concerns. So no plans currently.
If you are interested in the idea of Kim and you'd like to start playing with that, a great place to look is Rancher Desktop, which is, in fact, can you just go to rancherdesktop.io in your browser there, Bill? So if you go to rancherdesktop.io, this will give you information about Rancher Desktop, which is a way to get a Kubernetes cluster directly on your machine if you're using Mac or Windows, and it comes with Kim. So you can actually test building stuff directly in cluster in the use case that Bill just described, where you have a local environment running Kubernetes, and you don't want to build, push, pull, and go through that whole thing. You can just build directly in the cluster and speed up your development process. So this is still under development, but it's definitely a project to keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Lokesh would like to know if Rancher supports Azure DNS.
That would be one we'd have to, I don't know the answer off the top of my head, so that would be a good question for the community. Asking that forum.
Yeah, so Lokesh, in that case, please post that in the community, but give a specific use case about how you'd like to use Azure DNS within Rancher or within Kubernetes so that we can help frame the answers correctly. Chamika asks, how can we separate prod from dev, from staging environments? And specifically, do we need to create separate clusters? Maybe you can share a little bit about how you see people solving that problem.
Yeah, I think, certainly, if dev, test, and prod for it, an application that really has two users and it's you and your friend, you could maybe do something within a single cluster. But I think for anything real production ready that's actually servicing traffic, separate clusters, at least for production and your dev test, if not separate clusters for each environment at a minimum. We've got several customers actually that will actually use separate Rancher installations where production clusters are only on a specific Rancher install, and all dev test is in a separate one. It just depends on some of your overall requirements as far as that isolation and separation of systems. Actually, this would be a good use of our new branding. You can change the color of your production one to red, and your dev test to a different color or something along those lines. So it's very clear which workspace or which area you're working in. So yeah, it really just depends on what level your organization is comfortable with and requirement-wise, regulatory. But yeah, typically at least separate clusters.
We have two questions, one from Mike and one from Simon about Rancher D. Mike would like to know when it will support 2.6 deployments, and Simon would like to know when Rancher D 2.6 will be released. Yeah, so Rancher D was a 2.5 update as an experimental feature. It went through a lot of changes under the hood, and I don't. It's currently not scheduled to come out yet as a standalone CLI or deployment agent at this time. Dax asks when we anticipate Rke2 and K3s cluster deployment from Rancher being not tech preview.
Yeah, that is something we're working on. It will be likely sometime next year.
Okay. Frederick gave us a follow-up with more information. Let me read this quickly. Okay, all right. So Frederick says, do the changes with Rke also apply to the cluster in which Rancher is running? And then the more information is, we currently used Rke setup clusters to deploy Rancher in, which was the recommended way to do it. And he's concerned that Rke1 looks like it's going to be EOL'd. And if it is, what's the impact of those deployments? So maybe you can talk about the future of Rke.
Yeah. So, we plan to support Rke for a good long while. Like I said, we've added support for the external Docker shim so that we can continue to, provide new releases, updated Kubernetes versions for Rke going forward. So Rke supported. If you would like to move your Rancher installation in 2.5, we introduced the Rancher backup tool. You can take a backup of your Rancher installation from one cluster and restore it into another cluster of a different type and swing the DNS. If you plan to do that, I would make sure you talk to your CSM and support just to maybe walk through that upgrade process. But that is a path that you could explore.
We were in an earlier meetup a bunch of months ago where Bill actually surprised us all with a demo of migrating from a Rancher environment in one location out to a new EKS cluster that he had just deployed. And I remember him starting the demo and being like, well, hopefully this will work. And it was beautiful and flawless. And it took just a matter of seconds to back it up, restore it, repoint the DNS, wait for the TTL to expire, and then all of the downstream clusters just connected to the new EKS cluster. So that's definitely a thing to check out.
Yeah.
I'm also writing a quick response. Okay, next up. Oh, I can see the bottom of the list of questions. Okay, cool. So Cypher asks how to manage Linux and Windows nodes together, and apart from Flannel as the CNI, can we use any other CNI in 2.6? I think that's in the Windows context.
Within Rke, I believe the settings are the same as they were in 2.5. In 2.6, we are exploring Calico. And we have I believe we have a working prototype or working install of it in 2.6. I believe that actually it's the only one that's supported in Rke2 Tech Preview custom clusters.
Yes.
Yeah. So we are working on that.
Please notes. Daniel has, first of all, Daniel says, thanks a lot for the presentation. You're welcome, Daniel. And the question is, this might end up being one for the community, but I'm gonna test you, Bill. Why does the OIDC keycloak implementation query the server to fetch the groups instead of reading them from the OIDC tokens? What do you think?
Sorry, what was the beginning of the question? I missed it.
Here, I'll actually paste it in Slack. So it's in the Slack group that we're all in. But it's, why does the OIDC keycloak implementation query the server to fetch the groups instead of reading them from the OIDC tokens? And it's totally fine if you don't have an answer.
Yeah, I think that one would have to be unpacked a little bit more. Yeah, that would have to be unpacked a little bit more.
All right, so Daniel, please take that to, so there's actually two places you could take that. One would be the community, just to have a conversation about it. Another one is it almost sounds like it could be a GitHub issue. If you are familiar with Keycloak and we're doing it one way and you think that it would be better if we did it another way, then feel free, head over to GitHub, open an issue about that, and start a conversation there, which will involve the engineering teams and either get you an answer or, you know, we'll take it from there. But it's an excellent question. Thank you. Next up. Douglas says that you mentioned high-level metrics and charts are missing in 2.6. Do you know what he's referring to?
High level. So what I was saying in 2.6, the dashboard metrics for like a deployment or a stateful set. In Rancher Monitoring V1, we had an aggregate of all the pods within that, a view with all the pods within that deployment. That hasn't been brought over yet, but we do intend to bring that back.
Okay, so that makes sense. Are there any other things that were in 2.5 metrics related that also haven't, or I guess maybe even not metrics related, that also haven't been brought over but are scheduled to? Anything that you can think of?
So, I mean, we did a lot of the improvements in 2.5. So at a minimum, you can expect all the new stuff to be at the same level as 2.5. We've been collecting feedback and making improvements since we released those features. 2.6, continues to build on that work and enhance it. So at a minimum, you can anticipate similar behaviors. And in the case of monitoring, we've been adding enhancements as well. And logging.
Andrew asks if anywhere in the 2.6 lifecycle, does the roadmap identify design templates for OPA Gatekeeper to help people migrate away from pod security policies? Is there anything like that scheduled or planned?
Certainly in the backlog, we've got some ideas. And in general, it ties to an overall approach we want to take with security. And so that's, policy and compliance driven approach. So being able to have, a pre-canned set of, configurations that would work. So we are in the early phases of kind of kicking those ideas around, with the intention of bringing them out sometime in the future, but it's not currently, certainly not in the short term or midterm, not within the next 6 months or so.
All right. Can you pop open a tab and head over to kubewarden.io?
Oh yeah, that's a good thing to discuss.
If you are interested in pod security policies and you're looking at things like OPA Gatekeeper or Kyverno, we are building KubeWarden, or maybe it's KubeWarden. I don't know. I say Kube for everything because it's Kubernetes. Like I still say KubeCon. So we're building KubeWarden, which is an admission policy controller using WASM policies. So you don't have to learn a whole new programming language, or you're not limited to what you can do with YAML. You can actually build these things in WASM and use them in every environment. We're also building a hub where people can share their policies, and they're lightning fast and extremely flexible. So this is also still under development, but the development pace is aggressive, and it's already to a state where you can use this. So much like Rancher Desktop, this is another project that I recommend you keep an eye on. And in fact, Bill, I'm going to send you a link. You know what? Never mind. I won't, because it'll take me too long. I was going to send you a link to open in a tab, but we'll just move back to questions.
Yep.
Prakash would like to know if you can talk a little bit about features of multi-cluster support that were added in 2.6. Specifically, is it federation-based or manager of manager?
Not quite sure. So within Rancher, to manage, deploy and manage applications, in that context, we've introduced Rancher Continuous Delivery, which is our GitOps engine, which is targeted at being able to deliver Kubernetes resources, applications to many, many clusters, and being able to customize and target each of those. The cluster manager bits, we can show and give you a single pane of glass of all your clusters that you've imported and registered into Rancher, and you can drop into each one of those and work with them however you need to. So those are the two primary approaches that we've got for the multi-cluster capabilities. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but that's currently how we address multi-cluster.
Works for me. All right, so I just posted a link in the chat to a new YouTube channel that we've created where demos of the projects that we're working on, so things like Loxy and COS Toolkit and KubeWarden and Rancher Desktop, the engineers who are building those things do internal demos, and I capture those and post them to that YouTube channel. So if any of the stuff that we're building is interesting to you and you want to see the progress as it's going on, subscribe to that channel and you'll get updates as videos come out every couple of weeks. So that's in the chat window in the little GoToWebinar panel over there. Here's a question from Christoph. Is it possible to define custom cluster applications?
I'm not sure what that means exactly.
Christoph, if you're still with us, if you could just post that again with more information. All right, here's a question from Daksh. One of the things that is a point of interest in my environment is CIS scanning. Is it just a matter of deploying it from apps and marketplace and then just running a scan?
Yeah, we have we have default profiles for a few of the distributions, and so with those you can deploy, and then there are the ability, if you know you're not going to adhere to a specific one for some reason, then you can skip those. There's also mechanisms that were introduced in the new version of the CIS scanner in 2.5 and into 2.6 that you can provide additional configurations and profile information to customize that if you need to.
Okay. Courtney asks if there's going to be any integration to or from SUSE Manager.
There's within SUSE Manager, not today, no.
Okay.
Not at the Rancher levels.
All right. Alejandro would like to know if Harvester is going to be an app that you can install from the app marketplace from Rancher in the future, and then work with Kubernetes and hyperconverged infrastructure technology at the same time from the same interface.
Yeah, that's yeah, Rancher and Harvester integration is yeah, something that will be coming. Don't have a lot of details to share just yet, but yeah, you can think that you look at Rancher as being sort of the multi-cluster management piece of that, and the ability to deploy Kubernetes clusters on top of that or create VMs would be doable through Rancher. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Boris asks, will the log capture integrations, for example, Splunk, still work?
Yeah, the new logging tools have support for Splunk and Kafka and a bunch of other integrations and outputs. Yeah.
Okay. We have 3 more questions that are definite asks, and then we have about 20 that we want to keep going. We'll go through. So let's just burn through these last 3. Are there any plans for tighter coupling between Rancher and Susa Micro OS or Cubic? And the second part of that question is, do you recommend using either of those in conjunction with Rancher 2.6?
We are working on getting SLE Micro onto the support matrix for K3S and Rke2. So those will be, SLE Micro will be a certified OS to use with those distributions.
Okay. Mattia would like more information about Rancher 2.6 and GPU orchestration.
Yeah, I mean, this is a deep area where you can dive in, so it'd probably be good to jump into the forums, but I know we've got users using Kubernetes, Rancher, and GPUs, so it'd probably be a good place to go find other users that have kind of gone down that path in their experience. It's an area where I think Kubernetes is continuing to evolve, and so I think in the future we'll probably have something in the product to make that easier, but today I think it's supportable, it's doable, but yeah.
Okay. I don't remember where. I guess it was with Rke. We had an option where you can like enable GPU support, or there was something in the deployment that I remember being about GPUs.
Yeah,
but yeah,
so
I'm
you can enable that in our EKS clusters with the managed nodes, so you can enable GPU support. And we've got our open source. I'll beat you to the open source page. The open source AI ops tool, Opni is using Rancher as part of their development, and they're using GPUs for some of their machine learning algorithms. So it is doable, and you can consume GPUs within the Rancher context. But like I said, I know there's a lot of development and activity going on in that ecosystem. And so, yeah, it'd be good to join the community and help, shape what that could look like.
Totally. Can you open another tab and go to opni.io?
How do you remember all of these?
Oh, because that's what I do. So Opni, AI Ops for Kubernetes. This is yet another open source project that we're building. This is also still under development, but this does anomaly detection and uses machine learning to figure out when something deviates from a baseline so that it can predict failures before they happen, or help you do root cause analysis of, something happened that led to something else that led to a failure. You can trace that back through this tool to find out what the critical piece was where things first deviated. This uses GPUs for all of its AI ML stuff, which isn't directly related to the question that we were just asked. But this is yet another super cool project to keep an eye on. So that's at opni.io. Richard asks if there's an easy way to view resource consumption, CPU, memory, storage by project, and also show available capacity. And then in parentheses, he says, we set limit quotas and we need to know whether we can increase them with current worker nodes.
I mean, those metrics are being collected at least at a cluster aggregate level and probably by namespace out of the box. I think you could probably, there's nothing out of the box that shows that information exactly that format, but it should be possible to build a dashboard that helps you out there, that would get you the information you're looking for.
Okay. All right. We're back at the top of the list now, and we're going through all of the, if we have time to get to them, questions, which it looks like we have time to get to them. We scheduled 2 hours for this, so that still gives us 30 minutes. And remember, this is being recorded, so if you do have to drop for another reason, you'll get a link to the video later, and you can come back and check it out. Starting from the top, Nick would like to know if cloud credentials are still tied to a single user on the Rancher side.
Yes, but I believe they can be tied to a cluster template now, which could then be used by others, indirectly at least.
Okay. So the answer sounds like maybe.
Yeah.
That would be another question to probably take to the community and ask how people are using those and explore. Did you want to follow up with something, Bill?
No, that's yeah. Community would be good.
Okay. Yep. Nick would also like to know about our Terraform provider, Rancher2. Terraform, the Rancher2 provider for Terraform, and if 2.6 support is in there.
Yeah, we're continuing to update it for things that weren't necessarily there. Yes, we're continuing to update it and add support for the objects that are being added to 2.6. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Chuck says, for access to fleet continuous delivery in 2.6, will it be available to people with the cluster member role, or is it only accessible to people with the cluster owner role?
I'd have to look a bit. I'd have to go back and look at how the RBAC for fleet is set up.
Okay. Yeah, we're getting to the edge scenario questions here. Bill, despite knowing a lot, doesn't know everything, and we're a much larger company now with a lot more people working on the projects. It was probably easier for Bill to answer every question about it when Bill was, when we were much smaller. So anything that we can't answer today, take it to the community, and you guys will get your answers there. Or open GitHub issues is another option, or look at the docs, or just try it and see what happens, which is oftentimes how I learn the best way. I'm like, I wonder if it can do this. Oh, it can. Cool. This is another GPU question. Let's skip that because I think we've established that GPU stuff is a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. Let's skip that. And okay, so some of these questions that are flagged as maybes, I'm just going to skip them in the interest of time and in the interest of specificity. So for example, somebody asked if it's possible to convert one CNCF cluster to a different distribution. It doesn't really have anything to do with what we're talking about today, but no, you can't you can't flip your Kubernetes from one to another. You could either use a GitOps methodology to deploy stuff and then build a new cluster and deploy into that, but there's no like Harry Potter spell to convert your cluster. It would be cool if there was. Make competition interesting. Okay, so here's a question about backwards compatibility with the API. Are API calls in 2.6 compatible with 2.5?
Yeah, the v3 API is consistent with that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I think we always try to make sure that API changes are backwards compatible, or if they're deprecated, there's a long period where we support both methods of doing something that's heavily documented before something moves away.
Yeah, if there's a change, typically we would also include that in the release notes. So.
Okay. Okay, this is interesting. Balaji says, in my AWS setup, all of my users have multi-factor authentication enabled. I'm planning to use Rancher for the deployment on EKS. In this case, can I use a user credential with MFA, or is there an alternate approach?
So in order to do multi-factor auth with Rancher, you have to integrate it with a authenticate. We let the identity provider do that. So for instance, you integrate, if you tie Rancher to your, say, Okta, for instance, Okta can enforce the two-factor auth and then hand you back, or then you'd be signed in through Rancher. So that is how two-factor auth is handled. It's delegated out to the identity provider.
But what about if you wanted to use credentials, like creating cloud credentials to deploy an EKS cluster? Can you use a user credential that has an MFA token attached to it, or do they need to create like a system-specific cloud IAM account just for deploying clusters?
It would need to be that. The reason for that is we need the tokens to be long-lived, so that if, for instance, if that token expires and a node goes down, we couldn't recreate it for you. And so in order for us to continuously manage the cluster going forward, we would need we need that credential to communicate with the cluster for long periods of time.
Makes perfect sense. Scrolling through questions here. Oh, okay. I think, so here we have a question from Shamika that I think might be an opportunity to pitch Fleet. Shamika wants to know, how can we replicate resources between production and a DR environment? As I know, etcd and Longhorn work separately, but how can I sync cluster config and app data? App data that's gonna be a different question, between prod and DR. Do you have any stories of how customers are doing synchronization between DR environments and production environments?
Yeah, from a Kubernetes manifest standpoint, that would be a good area for Fleet, and then you would have to configure application level data replication outside of that. There are third-party tools that sit in this space as well. That help enable data synchronization between multiple environments. So there's some tools I believe like Portworx, and I think Trilio does something in this space as well.
Yeah, the backup providers definitely do. But what about Longhorn's DR volume? That, if they're using Longhorn, that would work, or that would help.
Yep, possibly.
So Longhorn, for those of you who aren't familiar with Longhorn, Longhorn is block level storage with block level replication using containers. So you run Longhorn in your Kubernetes cluster and it abstracts away the specifics of the underlying storage, allowing you to do really cool stuff where you can have multiple replicas in your Kubernetes cluster running on different nodes with the data replicated between them. So if a node goes down, the data exists somewhere else and you don't run into issues like AWS not detaching a volume from a node for 4 hours, and you can't get them to do it, and so you can't actually bring the workload up on another node. Longhorn abstracts all that away, does all the replication, but it has a really cool feature where you can actually designate another DR environment somewhere else, and it will replicate the data to that as well. I don't remember offhand the process of promoting that to a live state, but that is in the Longhorn documentation. So that's another option of a thing that you could look at, because Longhorn is, of course, free and open source. That was Shamika. What do we got next? Let's skip that. So if you've asked a question and I'm skipping it, I apologize. It just means that we're getting late into this, and I want to hit the most specific questions. Real quick, Bill, can you hop back over to the Rancher tab and show where the continuous delivery options are located?
Yeah, so in 2.6, in this new hamburger menu, there's the continuous delivery global app. And here you can specify your Git repositories, create cluster groups. So you can label your clusters and aggregate them, and then target deployments specifically to those. You can customize your deployments depending on the group based on selectors. So it's a very, very flexible deployment tool and really designed for being able to lay out configuration across many, many clusters.
When you hopped into this menu, I saw you switch from Fleet Local to Fleet Default. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Yeah, so Fleet Default is where all of your downstream clusters are attached and where you work with those. Fleet Local is the cluster that's running the Rancher management server. So if you want to apply settings in the Rancher cluster for doing GitOps to drive Rancher management things, this would be the location to do that. So if you wanted to enable backups, for instance, you would add a Git repo to Fleet Local. That would then deploy the Rancher backup operator, which would back up the Rancher application.
Okay. Sorry, somebody's question just jumped out. It's funny when I encounter questions where somebody replied to something that we were talking about, like 23 minutes ago, but then I see it now, and they just seem kind of ironic sometimes. This is interesting. Kagler says, can the Rancher cluster agent can be seen as an alternative to a lightweight, secure VPN connection to IoT devices? How that?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that means exactly.
I don't think that so not directly to an IoT device, because obviously like the Rancher cluster agent means that it's running on a Kubernetes cluster that's connected to Rancher. So if you have an IoT device that has the resources to do all of that, then it's a Kubernetes cluster. And in any Kubernetes cluster, if you have a Kubernetes cluster running out somewhere, and you don't want to make a VPN connection to be able to access it, then in that case, working through Rancher to access that Kubernetes cluster in whatever that edge environment is would work fine, because the Rancher communication is tunneled, it is encrypted. You just need to have the connection from that cluster back into Rancher, so it opens up a WebSocket connection and then it keeps that open. So I think the way that I would answer this is, if you have an edge cluster somewhere and you want to use it with Rancher, you don't also need a VPN to make that happen. If that edge cluster is running IoT sensors and stuff like that, that's just cool, but not connected. All right, we still see people trying to get their questions in. Okay, so Andy asked if Cilium CNI support is in the roadmap. We have Cilium for Rke2.
Correct.
Which is in tech preview. So yeah, we have it. But what level of support do we provide for the actual CNIs, like as part of SUSE Rancher and the SLA? Do we have support? Like, are the CNIs actually covered where you can call us if they break, or are they covered from the standpoint of we've tested and these work?
So we provide a chart for Cilium, and we expose certain options. So right now we can support that deployment configuration and what we've exposed and what's available. We can support and troubleshoot and work through issues on that CNI. When it comes to Calico, we're working to make that we're using that currently as the default in Rke2 provision through Rancher. So clusters deployed we'll use Calico. We're supporting as much of that stack as we can as far as available options and rolling those out. We will troubleshoot and bug fix and work with that in the community to resolve those things.
Okay. And Christoph gave us a follow-up, more information question. He was the one that asked the question about custom cluster applications. And I'm going to take what he gave us more information, and I'm going to expand on that. I'm going to ask you questions now. So what he wants to know is custom cluster applications similar to storage, Istio monitoring, et cetera, using a custom resource or config. So the first thing is can you show people how they can add their own Helm repositories to install custom applications from Helm?
Yeah. So if you come to the new apps and marketplace, we have this concept of chart repositories, and so you can create new ones. These are you give it a name and a URL, and it will pull. We can do both a Git repository with Helm charts that are laid out to the Rancher specification, as we've done with the Rancher catalog service, and we can also pull just generic Helm chart repositories. Once you add that, then we would pull down the apps, and then we would render tiles for those in here in the charts category.
Okay. So then, oh, go ahead, continue. Sorry, I thought you were pausing.
So then these applications could then just be clicked on and installed, by your users.
Right. Yeah. So anything that you add as a custom Helm repo, if Bill were to scroll down to the bottom, you see that these have colors. So there's blue, there's that's the Rancher stuff. There's this nice kind of orange color that are our partner charts. And with every Helm repo that you add, that repo gets a different color. So if we added the HashiCorp repo, for example, you would see HashiCorp stuff in like red or something, and they would show up as tiles down at the bottom. You can then filter with these filters up at the top by category or by actual repository because once you add a whole bunch of stuff, this menu becomes a little bit large. So you can filter that down to get a view that makes sense. The second part of the question that I wanted to ask Bill is I know when we install things like monitoring or Longhorn, we get menu options that show up in the left-hand menu. Is it possible for users to create their own Helm charts that after being installed also can update the Rancher UI to access those external UIs? Or can they add independent links on their own?
Yeah, so in Rancher 2.6, there's a new custom resource that we've introduced called the Nav Links. What that allows you to do is describe a link that would show up in the left-hand nav over here, or so you can have it show up and it can link out to like an external service or something along those lines. The other thing, let's see, where did I? We've also got it with the custom resource. You can link out to external services, or you can launch out to You can also link to services running within the cluster. There is a format that you can add that you can actually have a group of apps that you deploy. So if you have My Company apps or something, and then within this, you would have multiple tiles that are running as services within the cluster, and you can have your own icon and click on them, and they can run. We could click out to the UI for those. And so what that would do is, this isn't exposed publicly. It uses the proxies behind the scenes to access that, and you can leverage the same mechanisms there. So that custom resource is called the Nav Link. So that's been added, and so you can create these from YAML. And so here's the example of the spec.
Nice. I like the way that in 2.6 the UI now shows you all of the available options for the YAML, and they're just commented out or expandable or whatever, so that you can build your whole thing. You know what's here. You don't have to jump out to another window, or even in the Helm charts we include the default values.yaml, so you don't have to scroll through that README and figure out from the table what things you care about. It's just all right there for you and commented out if it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and then actually we've enhanced that now. So when you select the application, you can see all of this. And when you go to install, there's but you can see view chart info, which then slides out this without having to leave the page or go back. What was that README? So this has been, you can also shift where it shows up. So this is really a nice UX enhancement.
Yeah. Okay. We have a question from Remy, who wants to know, getting close to lunchtime here, my brain just totally stopped working. So Remy says, what would be the impact on hardware to run Rancher 2.6 on K3s in terms of additional CPU and RAM? So I think the question is if they already have a K3s cluster, but they want to run Rancher on it, what does Rancher require in additional CPU and RAM?
It depends on the number of clusters and nodes attached to it. Yeah, and in the docs, we have some recommended sizing for what that could look like.
Yep. My personal experience is if I have a Kubernetes cluster, whether it was Rke or K3s, K3s runs fine on really small hardware. So I've run K3s clusters, single nodes with anywhere from 1 gig of RAM to 4 gigs of RAM. If I'm using the embedded etcd, then I need a minimum of 4 gigs of RAM, and that doesn't leave me a lot of room for actual workloads. I used to, back in the early Rancher, well, certainly not Rancher 1.6, but then the early days of the Rancher 2 product line, we could get away with running Rancher in 4 gigs of RAM, but it doesn't do well. And now I would not recommend running it on less than 8 gigs of RAM. And then the more clusters that it's managing, the more workloads it's actually running, the more CPU and RAM those things are going to take. So beyond that, you're going to need to look at the sizing recommendations and then just keep an eye on it. And as it starts to creep up above 75 or 80% actual utilization, just bump those numbers up. Christian would like to know if the Rancher, sorry, let me start over. Christian would like to know if the Rancher 2 Terraform provider will be updated to allow for Rke2 provisioning.
Yes, it will be updated to include that. Timing and when is still TBD. Again, it's a tech preview, and that would definitely be something we would want in place for GAing that. We'd want to get it out earlier for people to test, but yes, it's on the roadmap.
Okay. Can you jump over to Apps and Marketplace again? And all right, so I see over on the right-hand side on the second row, we have OPA Gatekeeper as a Rancher chart. Can you talk for a moment about what people get when they install that?
Yeah, so it deploys the OPA Gatekeeper operator and the custom resources. Rancher, it is covered under Rancher SLA if you're a supported customer. So when you deploy that, you can leverage it for your policies and admission controller.
Okay. I see that we have 6 minutes left, so I'm just looking if the 2 questions that we have. Yeah, so I'm going to not answer those because they don't fit into the time that we have left. Okay. I'm gonna give you one last question, which I'll let you answer it, and then I want to tell a story about what it reminded me of. Jedry wants to know if the versions of cluster tools charts seem to start with 100, and just wondered if that meant anything.
I believe that's our versioning system that we've added to that. Not certain, like, is this the new? I believe engineering has implemented that. I'm not 100% familiar with what the background is on that.
Because why not? No, it reminded me of Spinal Tap with the whole volume going to 11, which actually exists in Kubernetes where nodes can run 110 pods, not 100 pods, but 110 pods, because that's the volume going to 11. All right, let's wrap this up. I'm going to steal the presentation back from you, but before I do, is there anything you wanted to say in closing? Otherwise, I'll take it back and we'll run.
No, thanks everyone. Those were great questions, and glad we got to show you the product.
All right. So yes, thank you to everyone, especially the 132 of you that are still here. I looked about 40 minutes ago, and there were more than 210 people here. So thank you all for staying, for watching, for learning, for asking fantastic questions. We really should make this a game show, like called Stump Bill or something, because I mean, yeah, it's great questions. We have some upcoming stuff, some upcoming events that you can join. We have the October meetup. The date is yet TBD, but that'll be all about Longhorn. So you can keep an eye on SUSE.com/events. That will tell you when that's happening. And of course, we are going to be at KubeCon. KubeCon. KubeCon is both in-person and virtual this year, and hopefully, fingers crossed, the in-person part will not get canceled, but it looks like at this point it's going to go through. We're there. We'll be in booth P3. I'll be there. Bill, are you going to be there?
I will not be able to make this one, no.
Okay. So I'll be there. We'll have a whole lot of people from SUSE and Rancher. We'll be demoing projects like KubeWarden and Rancher Desktop, and we'll be there to answer all of your questions. We will also have the virtual component. So if you're not able to join, there will be people staffing that, and we'll have recordings, just all of the stuff that you already know about from virtual events. We will also be doing some live streaming from there. So keep an eye on the Rancher YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/c/Rancher, where we will have interviews with customers and project owners and people at the conference and whatever else we can do just to help those of you who aren't able to join feel like you're actually there. I strongly encourage you to join the SUSE and Rancher community. This is the best place to learn everything about the stuff that we have going on and to also grow as a cloud native practitioner, whether that's with development, with Kubernetes, with operations, with security, whatever you're looking for, there's something there for you. So you can join for free at community.suse.com. And our next event, this isn't a class. I think this is a class. So the next thing we're doing is Cloud Native at Scale, which starts on September 7th, which was a week ago, which started on September 7th a week ago. But that's okay, because the way that we run classes is even if you join late, you still got access to all the stuff that came before. So you can join them and just watch those things on demand. So we'll be covering deploying Kubernetes at scale, deploying, monitoring, and testing applications for something that rolled off the right side of the screen there. We can just imagine what that word is. Utilization and traffic load at scale, and then horizontal scaling to the extreme. So all this is about taking what you can do with Kubernetes and blowing it up to the biggest thing that you can possibly imagine. So head over to community.susa.com for that. I got less than a minute left. Thank you all for watching. Thank you so much, Bill, for an amazing and I'm sure exhausting presentation. I want to thank John, who was working behind the scenes to answer all the questions with me. Yeah, all of you stay safe. We'll see you in the next event. Take care.